All right, welcome back to the Homestand Show, and the conversation continues with Brad Treliving. I mean, a lot to get into. He said all the right things, though, right, Justin?
What did you expect
In
him to
that
say?
press conference? No, just the way he spoke and very comfortable, very relaxed.
Yes.
I mean, we weren't going to get much from it. He's not going to say, "Yeah, I'm going to, trade Austin Matthews. I'm trading someone
No.
from the core four. I'm blowing it up and get rid of the coach." He didn't say any of that stuff.
He's
But
going to Arizona too to meet with Matthews.
yes, he did hint towards kind of what his priorities are. We all know the priority list, but he mentioned, listen, Austin Matthews is at the top of that thing. Then the rest of the contracts, then he's going to get into the coach. We'll talk a lot about that later, but it sounds like Keith might be staying. But it's just interesting to see someone who's so experienced and how he's going to adapt to such a hot market in the NHL. Speaking of which, let's bring in our next guest. He is Salim Valji, Calgary Bureau reporter for TSN. Salim, thanks for doing this. You've been around the Calgary Flames a lot. You've been around Brad Treliving. What do you think Leafs fans can expect with him as a GM?
Well, I think they're going to expect someone that's bold. He's made an awful lot of big moves here. You look at the fingerprints he has all over this roster. The Elias Lindholm, Noah Hanifin trade stands out. Obviously, what happened last summer, dealing from a little bit of a point of weakness and ending up getting Matthew Tkachuk, trading him for some good pieces in Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau. I think you're going to see someone that's bold and aggressive and someone that has a lot more resources in Toronto. I don't think that we saw, gentlemen, sort of the real Brad Treliving in Calgary because of the ownership maybe not being as open to investing as much. You go to MLSE where you've got a seemingly endless amount of resources for player amenities and building out a scouting department and things like that. So I think you'll see Treliving really kind of shape the organization off the ice in a way that sees fit. And I also think, Calgary's generally had really good back ends. They've had good defenses. Even right now, it's a really good group. It's deep, it's young. Noah Hanifin, Rasmus Anderson, Oliver Shillington is going to come back. And I would expect some changes on the back end for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But, Treliving is as dialed in maybe as any other GM. And I think he's going to be aggressive. Obviously, it doesn't sound like the core four is going to be changing, but I think he's going to be aggressive in different ways. And honestly, the Leafs got a really good person here too, someone that kind of embraces and understands the spotlight. So I think it's a win for Leafs fans, and they'll have a very capable GM for the coming years.
So the one thing I noticed during this press conference was just how well spoken Brad Treliving is. Of course, you were well connected with the Calgary Flames. What was he like dealing with on a day-to-day basis with the media?
He was great. My kind of Treliving story is maybe last year before a phone interview began, I made a sort of throwaway comment about my dad coming to town, and I was just like tidying up my apartment. Like it was something kind of small, but he actually remembered that my dad was coming, and he told Team PR, and Team PR was like, Brad kind of mentioned that your dad might be in town, so tell your dad to come to a game, and we'll make sure he has a good experience. So, something like that, it kind of shows the character of someone, right? That they remembered something small and trivial before an interview, and I've had really good dealings. He's I think not been thrilled with some of the things I've written or said in the past, but it's generally been a really good and professional and solid relationship. And it's one, when he left, when he resigned, we sent a couple of nice texts back and forth, and he was good to deal with. He was the type of person that remembers your name, remembers your family, wants to know how they're doing, and someone that's a really good communicator. You mentioned, I think he's extremely polished. And they're going to need that, right? Like you've got a fan base that's a little bit hurting right now. Some expectations weren't met. And Treliving as sort of the face of your franchise it's good. Like he's maybe not going to say much publicly, but he'll always be there. He'll always answer questions. And I think fans will grow to appreciate that. And when they see him in the streets, I think they'll be really impressed with kind of interacting with him on a one-to-one basis and just how amenable and approachable he is.
I think in this market, especially, Leafs fans just want some honesty, and it feels like that's what's we're gonna get from Brad Treliving. I want to talk about his relationship with players. He said he's very protective of his guys. He mentioned Matthew Tkachuk as someone he looks at like a son. Did you get a sense in Calgary what his relationship was like with some of those players there?
Yeah, I think it was really good, actually. I think if you look at how this team was built in free agency, it's not just Huberdeau and Weegar, who he did convince to commit long-term before they'd really played a game. Jacob Markstrom had options. Blake Coleman had options. Chris Tanev, the list goes on. And I know that there are perils to free agency and building your team that way. And I know that that it does come down to money, but those players had options and they chose to come to Calgary, a colder climate. It's a market that does not exactly have a state-of-the-art building. And it is one where there is some pressure, right? Like you're going out in the street and you might get recognized. And yet he convinced these players that they should sign long-term in that city. And that goes to show, I think, his ability to sell the organization. And I think he was also a really good buffer between sort of the team and ownership, and kind of making Calgary a very player-friendly place. You mentioned Matthew Tkachuk and the words of glowing praise they've kind of lobbed back and forth at each other, but I don't think Tkachuk is the only one that's Treliving really had a good impact on. I think that a lot of players really appreciated Brad, and we're frankly sad to see him let go, see him kind of part ways with the organization. So relationships, that's a strong suit. You have to be able to sell your organization not only to free agents, but to fans and to even, corporate money holders. So Treliving did a great job of that. And I think he had a really, really strong relationship. And that's not easy, and that's not everyone's forte, right? Like even, I'm in Edmonton right now, and we had a few GMs in the past that did not particularly do a great job of that, whereas Treliving did. So it's a good sign. I know maybe it seems like I'm gushing and I'm not an heir to the Boston pizza fortune, unfortunately, so I don't have a stake in this, but it is a really good hire for not only on the ice, but off the ice.
You mentioned the players that he convinced to stay. What about the players who didn't stay? I'm looking at Matthew Tkachuk, Dougie Hamilton, Adam Fox, Johnny Gaudreau. Is that on Treliving, or is that on just the market that is Calgary?
I think it's a little bit of circumstance. I think they truly did think they had Gaudreau locked and loaded before he elected to move on, and that kind of stunned the organization, and Craig Conroy mentioned it. I think it's a little bit of the market. It's, I don't think the Flames organization kind of has the amenities that other organizations do. Forget the arena, which is a big part of it, but I think even, certain services and things that players get, it's less in Calgary than it is in other markets. And I think that's a factor. You look at the fact that a lot of these guys, like all of us, I'm sure, love to play golf, and you don't exactly get to do that during the season in Calgary. You add all of that up, I don't think it's necessarily on Treliving. I think it's just a function of being in a Canadian market. And Calgary is a great place to live and be, and I kind of say that as an Edmontonian, but it really is a great city. But I think in Gaudreau's case, he legitimately loved it. And he was really, really open to staying and becoming a Flame for life, basically, and having his number in the rafters. In Tkachuk's case, I think the organization and maybe the coach was a little bit of a factor, but in terms of why players maybe are moving on, well, you got to remember, like, Huberdeau would have had options, Weegar would have had options, and they chose to come to Calgary. So you win some, you lose some, but I don't think it's a reflection on Treliving as much as it is, we can play golf 12 months a year. We don't get recognized. We can live in no tax states, so why not take that option? But I think if you ask Blake Coleman or some of the others, they've generally been pretty happy with their experiences in Calgary.
Yeah, and the reason I pose that question is because if you go online on social media, it's very negative. Oh, he lost these guys. He got rid of these big contracts. Yeah. What's he going to do in Toronto? Yeah. But obviously, it's obviously not all his fault. Salim, we really appreciate you coming on here on short notice.
Yeah, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Great to be on.